team of Truthseekers is on a mission. Scientists, historians, archaeologists, all on the trail of history's enigmas. Searching for the truth behind the greatest mysteries known to humanity. For centuries, people have hunted for the Bible's most sacred relics, but no artifact was more powerful or mysterious than the Ark of the Covenant. Said to hold the very word of God, the tablets of the Ten Commandments. Many have searched for it in vain. Did it really exist? And if it did, what might have happened to it? In London, our team assemble. Our 4 Truthseekers combine decades of experience in different fields. But they all have one goal: to apply their knowledge and reveal the truth.
There are mysteries, and then there are mysteries.
I have always loved uncovering the secrets of the past.
We need to go back and unpick the untruths from the truths.
Age-old problems that we've been asking ourselves over 100 years, really, can now be solved.
They'll follow the clues left behind, unravel the secrets of the past, separate fact from fiction, and together they'll uncover the truth behind the greatest mysteries ever. For centuries, people have hunted for the Bible's most sacred relics, the one true cross, the Holy Grail. But no biblical artifact was more powerful than the Ark of the Covenant, believed to contain God's instructions to the world.
I think for my generation, we grew up with Indiana Jones, so that story of the Ark as a terrifying weapon, kind of a biblical nuclear bomb, is really interesting and really exciting.
The Ark brings together 3 main components of the Bible. That is Moses, the 10 Commandments, and the Israelites. So it's all brought together, represented by the Ark of the Covenant.
As an anthropologist, what fascinates me most about the Ark is not the search for the physical box. It's what the Ark stands for, its symbolism. That's what has driven the frantic search for it.
In the Bible, the Ark of the Covenant was the ornate chest in which the ancient Israelites carried the 10 Commandments. Legend has it that this relic possessed immense power. It was an ancient weapon of mass destruction. To touch it meant death. Many have searched for the Ark, but the truth has never been uncovered. Did it really exist? And if it did, what might have happened to it? The team has gathered in London to share their findings. Cultural historian Dr. Fern Riddell has been examining the written accounts of the Ark of the Covenant.
So the first place that we find any kind of biblical reference to the Ark of the Covenant is in the book of Exodus, and that's the story of Moses leading the Israelites to Mount Sinai and connecting them with God, becoming God's chosen people.
According to the Old Testament, the Israelites were living in slavery in Egypt under the rule of a cruel and ruthless tyrant, the Pharaoh. But they were freed by a prophet, a man named Moses. He led them out of Egypt, across the Red Sea, to freedom in the deserts beyond.
So Moses has brought the Israelites out of slavery. They've fled Egypt, and they've spent a huge amount of time in the wilderness trying to find somewhere where they would be safe. And they end up in the foothills of Mount Sinai. And at this mountain, Moses ascends up, where he spends 40 days and 40 nights communing with God.
When Moses returned from Mount Sinai, he carried the 10 Commandments. Carved into 2 tablets, these laws told the Israelites how to worship God and how to live with one another. But it wasn't just the 10 Commandments that God gave to Moses. The Bible also states that God provided him with instructions for a container to put them in. The Bible describes how this ark was to be made. And they shall make an ark of acacia wood. 2.5 cubits shall be its length, 1.5 cubits its width, and 1.5 cubits its height.
So it's made from acacia wood, which is connected at this time to the idea and the mythology of the tree of life. It has poles, so it can be carried because they're a nomadic people. And it's quite small. It's made out of cubits. Now, a cubit is basically the distance between your forefinger and your elbow, so about 45 to 50 centimeters. And the ark is about 1 meter and just under 1.5 meters long, and about 75 centimeters high and wide.
And you shall overlay it with pure gold, inside and out. And you shall make on it a molding of gold all around. You shall cast 4 rings of gold for it, and put them in its 4 corners. And you shall make poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with gold.
It was to be carried with them from that point on. Everywhere the Israelites went, the ark literally led the way.
On top was the caporet, the mercy seat. It was solid gold, with 2 winged cherubim facing each other, enclosing a seat. This was God's throne.
So the ark is not just a box. It's designed to give its followers direct access to the voice of God, to his guidance, to his judgment.
The Bible tells the story of how the freed Israelites wandered the desert for 40 years. And at each camp they made, God instructed Moses to build a sacred tent, a dwelling for him among his people. It was called the tabernacle. And inside, in its most sacred place, the Holy of Holies, was placed the ark.
So when we're thinking about the ancient world as being this huge melting pot of religions and tribes and gods, one of the things the Ark of the Covenant does is it gives the Israelites a symbol, something to unite behind and create one religion.
Throughout the Israelites' long march through the desert, the ark cleared their path of dangers. When they finally reached the Promised Land, it was the ark that parted the Jordan River and allowed them to cross. And in the war that followed for control of their Promised Land, it was the ark that brought down the walls of the city of Jericho.
So the ark is this incredibly kind of unifying symbol for the Israelites. It brings them together. It makes them a nation, one to be feared, because this is a weapon that they take with them to battle. So it destroys cities, but it doesn't make them unbeatable. And there's actually a moment where they lose ownership of the ark to the Philistines.
After defeat for the Israelites in battle, the Ark of the Covenant was seized by their enemies, the Philistines. But if they had hoped to wield its power for themselves, they were mistaken. Wherever the Philistines took the ark, disaster befell them.
The ark brings only destruction. There's pestilence, people die, anyone who comes close to it is immediately incredibly sick. And it's one of those things where it's very clear that this holy relic of the Israelites belongs only to them.
The terrified Philistines returned the ark to the Israelites, where it was kept safe at Kiriath Yearim, the city of trees, before it was supposedly moved west to Jerusalem and the site of an historic fight.
One of the most famous battles between the Israelites and the Philistines is actually that of a little boy and a giant, and that's David and the Philistine Goliath. When David defeats Goliath, he then goes on to become king of the Israelites and goes on to conquer Jerusalem and give them a nation and a home. And of course, at the heart of that new home was the Ark of the Covenant.
It was King David's son and successor, Solomon, who the Bible says built the first temple in Jerusalem.
So what King Solomon does is he decides to build a specific temple, a place to house the Ark. And within it, it has an inner sanctum. This is the Holy of Holies, a place where the Ark will always be safe and always be protected.
According to the Bible, the Ark then remained in Jerusalem for hundreds of years, until a new power arose in the east and threatened the kingdom the Israelites had built.
So we're actually at a moment where the Bible meets accurate historical record, and this is with the appearance of the Babylonians. Now, they're a very important civilization that have come up around the same time as the Israelites have conquered Jerusalem, and they decide that that city should be theirs.
In the 6th century BC, the Babylonian Empire was one of the most powerful in the world. Under their king, Nebuchadnezzar II, the Babylonians swept out of modern-day Iraq and marched towards the coast of the Mediterranean. In their sights was Jerusalem. In 597 BC, Nebuchadnezzar besieged and conquered the city. The Babylonians looted Jerusalem's treasures and exiled the Israelite leaders. But at first, Nebuchadnezzar did not destroy the city. Instead, he installed a puppet regime. When that rebelled against his rule 10 years later, however, Nebuchadnezzar returned to Jerusalem. This time, he leveled the city and the temple.
So the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar razes Jerusalem to the ground, destroys it, and destroys the Temple of Solomon. And we actually have, both in the Bible and in Babylonian accounts, incredibly detailed records of what they took, not only killing and enslaving everyone, but things like incense burners and bronze shovels, really detailed stuff. The one thing we don't have is any reference to the Ark of the Covenant itself.
The Israelites eventually returned to Jerusalem and rebuilt the temple there. But the Ark did not return with them.
The one thing we don't have any record of is the Ark of the Covenant. It just vanishes. We don't find it in the Bible again, we don't find it in the Babylonian accounts. So was it hidden or was it destroyed? We just don't know.
That's the end of the story of the Ark of the Covenant as told by the Bible. But how much can we rely on the ancient text as a historical source? How much of the story could actually be true?
So the Bible is a religious text. It's a story of myth and legend and ideas and identity. It's not one that we should be using as accurate, factual information. We also have no way of proving its authorship. For a long time, older Bible scholars thought that Moses was the sole authority of the Old Testament. But of course, he dies in one of the books, so that would make it a little bit difficult. We think now that it was probably multi-authored, lots of different people adding to it as time and history went on.
Today, most scholars believe that the story of the Ten Commandments and the Ark of the Covenant was compiled in the 7th century BC, or possibly even later. It was likely based on earlier spoken traditions, stories told and retold from generation to generation.
We have to be incredibly careful when we use a source like the Bible, because it is this massive amalgamation that took place over such a long time. So we need to use accounts by the Babylonians or the Akkadians, people who can have their own record, that we can cross-reference them, and perhaps then the clues to what happens to the Ark will be revealed.
The Bible is a religious chronicle, not a history book, and the historical references are few, if any. But our fascination has remained, and people have continued to risk everything in the quest to be the first to find the Ark. Their fortunes, their reputations, even their lives. Was it destroyed? Stolen? How could something so important just disappear? a biblical relic said to have vanished more than 2,500 years ago. A relic that parted great rivers, felled city walls, and struck down anyone unworthy of touching it. Once held by the tribes of Israel, it was captured by the Babylonians. Mark Altaweel is digging deeper.
Perhaps they took it off back to Babylon, and so somewhere in the sands of Iraq, the Ark of the Covenant lies. Another story is that the Israelites, prior to the sack of Babylon, perhaps may have hidden it. Maybe they went to a nearby location, they found an area, and they just hid the Ark. So there's a lot of possibilities.
Dr. Mark Altaweel is an archaeologist and an expert in data analysis. He's been investigating the possible resting places of the Ark of the Covenant.
When the Bible was written, Christianity began to spread. From that time onwards, relics and stories about the Bible took effectively hold of people. They become really interested in the Holy Land, Constantine the Great, the first Roman emperor to believe in Christianity. His mother basically commissioned a campaign to find the true cross. So from that time onwards, really until today, people have been fascinated with the Holy Land and have been searching the area for relics in the Bible.
According to the Bible, the Ark should still have been at the temple in Jerusalem when the city fell to the Babylonians in 587 BC. But if it was destroyed or looted, there is no record of it.
Where have people suggested it was? Well, one widely believed theory is that it wasn't there at all when the Babylonians attacked, that it had been removed from the city before then.
It is claimed that the Ark was taken from the temple in Jerusalem during the time of King Solomon and snuck out of the city, out of the Holy Land, to modern-day Ethiopia.
One of the stories is the Keber Nagast, which is a story that the Queen of Sheba came to Jerusalem during the time of Solomon. And after some period of time there, she had a child with him. And one day Sheba wanted to go back to her lands. They basically took the Ark with them. And the lands associated with Sheba are Ethiopia today. So potentially, the Ark was taken to Ethiopia, and until to this day, the Ark has been there effectively. And there's a story that a church in Ethiopia actually contains or has the Ark.
So the Chronicle claims, the Ark was taken back to Ethiopia. It is said to have remained there ever since, in a small chapel guarded by a holy order of monks who admit no outsiders. Despite that rule, during the Second World War, a young British Army officer named Edward Ullendorf actually got secret access to the so-called Ark.
Ullendorf was a scholar of Ethiopian and Semitic studies, and during World War II, he was actually a young army officer who was stationed in Ethiopia, and he happened to be stationed at a church, and that church was the church associated with the Ark of the Covenant. So he claimed to have actually seen the Ark of the Covenant. The church had not allowed anyone to see it, but he claimed to have seen it, and he in fact stated that the Ark was of construction from the medieval period.
But the Ethiopians were not only ones suspected of sneaking the Ark out of the temple in Jerusalem.
There's a story found in the disputed text, an ancient text that is not really universally regarded as part of the Bible at all. It's called the Second Book of Maccabees.
The Second Book of Maccabees dates to the 2nd century BC. It explains how, just before Jerusalem was wiped out by the Babylonian Empire, the Hebrew prophet Jeremiah had a premonition of the disaster about to befall the city.
In the book Second Maccabees, the Ark is once again mentioned. The prophet Jeremiah, he gets a premonition that the city of Jerusalem is going to be destroyed by the Babylonians. And so what happens is the Ark is hidden in a secure place so the Babylonians would not find it.
It claims Jeremiah buried the treasure where Moses went up and saw the inheritance of God, a reference to the mountain Moses visited before he died.
Most have interpreted this as referring to Mount Nebo, the peak where Moses was allowed a glimpse of the promised land before his death. But there's another interpretation, that the inheritance it refers to is the laws and way of life given to Moses on Mount Sinai, and that mountain way to the south was where Jeremiah hid the ark. There's the one story that suggests this cave on Mount Sinai was sealed up and lost for centuries until the time of the Crusades, when it was rediscovered by a religious order of warrior monks, the Knights Templar.
Founded in the early 12th century, the Knights Templar quickly became one of the most powerful and wealthy religious orders in the world.
During this time, the Knights Templar was basically camping out one day near the ancient city of Petra in southern Jordan. And there they heard upon that the ark was not far away, and they went to a place called Mount Methbah, which is a mountain nearby, near Petra. And they went there and they effectively found the ark and other treasures associated with the temple, and they brought these eventually back to Europe.
It's been alleged that as the Crusaders withdrew from the Holy Land, the Templars took their treasures with them back to Europe and hid them there in a secret location.
The whole story sounds a bit hard to believe. First, finding the ark. How did they just happen to find the ark after centuries of having been hid? Second, even if they found the ark, then the assumption is eventually someone would hear about it. You can't just send the ark and all these treasures back to Europe and nobody would know about it. And even if they found the ark, let's say they did, they should have simply used it in the battlefield. The Knights Templar was engaged in combat with Muslim armies during this time. And given the stories about the ark being a powerful tool against God's enemies, then one would assume that the Knights Templar would try to use the ark in battle.
Since then, many have hunted for the riches of the Knights Templar. They've searched churches in England and in France, analyzing mysterious carvings or finding secret messages supposedly hidden in stained glass windows.
The sort of power that text, maps, and other kinds of objects we really consider sacred. The idea that perhaps God speaks to us in mystery. But if we are capable in interpreting different patterns, different symbols, we can potentially learn some of these secrets and discover important things.
But the Knights Templar are not the only ones who allegedly went looking for the Ark of the Covenant. The hunt goes on to this day. Shortly after the Second World War, a remarkable discovery was made in a complex of caves in the West Bank. Ancient texts dating back as far as the 3rd century BC, written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. The Dead Sea Scrolls shed light on the language, beliefs, and practices of Judaism and early Christianity. But one scroll, the last discovered in 1952, was unlike any other. It wasn't written on papyrus or parchment. The text was hammered into a thin sheet of copper.
Now, the writing in the Copper Scroll is a mix of Hebrew and Greek, but it's also hard to really understand what it's talking about. It's not necessarily very complete writing. It's mentioning something like 64 places that have various treasures buried in them, and the quantity is actually quite huge in terms of the number of items and weight of the treasure.
In the ruin in the Valley of Acre, in the monument on the 3rd course of stones, beneath the staircase, at a distance of 40 brick tiles, there is a silver chest. There are 100 golden ingots, 900 talents.
We don't know the source of this alleged treasure, but from the amounts of gold and silver described, many have concluded it must have come from the temple in Jerusalem. The instructions are quite exact. So many cubits this way, on this level, at this depth. There's one problem though. We're missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. We often simply don't know the starting point the scroll refers to, but that hasn't stopped people looking. And it hasn't stopped people thinking that among those treasures might be hidden the Ark of the Covenant.
In 2006, the American investigator Jim Barfield made an extraordinary claim. Barfield was a former arson inspector from Oklahoma. He had not studied archaeology and knew next to nothing about the region's landscapes and geography. But Barfield claimed to have done in half an hour what had eluded scholars for 5 decades: deciphered the locations of the Copper Scrolls treasure.
Now, Jim Barfield has come along, and he's actually claimed that he knows the starting point that's indicated in the Copper Scroll. He could not only locate that starting point using his investigatory skills, but he also can find the specific sites and areas indicated in the Copper Scroll. So he can sort of walk those distances mentioned, and he can find those specific sites. But many of the locations he claimed to have identified have been extensively excavated and examined. Nothing has ever been found.
Barfield believed that his theory was divinely inspired, but his claims have been rejected by archaeologists. No proof is found to link the Copper Scroll to the Ark of the Covenant.
Barfield is basing his ideas not necessarily on science, but perhaps more on his faith. But the problem is, even if he finds the right locations, the chances are the Ark is probably going to have been taken over the last 2,000 plus years. So, of course, even just knowing that you've discovered the instructions in the Copper Scroll doesn't mean necessarily you're going to find the Ark. It shows you the power that the Ark has. It's still drawing us in, and even to this day, we have people like Jim Barfield looking for the Ark.
There is no trace of the Ark among the Babylonians who conquered Jerusalem. No proof of it has been found with the Queen of Sheba in Ethiopia or anywhere else. Only 2 possibilities remain for our team. Will they confirm if it ever existed at all? Or perhaps that it never left Jerusalem and is hiding in plain sight? The investigation into the Ark of the Covenant has tracked leads from the Holy Land to Africa and across Europe. The team of Truthseekers have examined the clues in the Bible, compared them to the historical record and in the very ground itself. They investigated whether it could have been destroyed in the fall of Jerusalem, or whether it was spirited out of the city before that disaster. But there is another possibility that still remains.
People have spent a lot of time scratching around in the desert and looking for clues in manuscripts and scripture, but in the end of the day, what about Jerusalem itself? Maybe the Ark never left. Maybe it's still there.
The Temple of Solomon is believed to have been built on a hill in Jerusalem's Old City. The Hebrew Bible calls it the Temple Mount. At its center is the foundation stone. In Judaism, this is where the world began, where Abraham tried to sacrifice his son, and where the Holy of Holies in their original temple was located. It is a sacred place in Islam too. It's where the Prophet Muhammad was lifted up to heaven by the angel Gabriel. After the Muslims conquered Jerusalem in the year 638, they built a mosque on the site, with a shrine covering the foundation stone.
For those of you who've never been to the Dome of the Rock, this structure is built over a rock, and beneath it is the foundation stone. Beneath that, the Well of Souls, and the floor of that cave-like structure has a slab which, well, if you knock it, it makes a suspiciously hollow sound. And could it be that the priests in Jerusalem, faced with the Babylonians about to destroy their temple, simply dug down and put the Ark beneath the Holy of Holies?
Many have been curious to find out. In 1871, 2 English explorers, Sir Richard Burton and Lady Isabel Burton, visited Jerusalem and gained access to the Well of Souls. Lady Burton later wrote in her diary, "My husband did his best to procure the opening of the hollow-sounding slab in the center, but the time has not yet come." Such is the religious importance of Temple Mount that access has always been fiercely guarded and official excavations banned. But that has not stopped people from trying.
The Ark of the Covenant story seems to attract like a magnet. All these oddballs who turn up in Jerusalem looking for the Ark of the Covenant. The reasons why some of these people went on the hunt for the Ark were religious. Some of them, it was kind of pseudo-scientific. Others were just adventurers, explorers. There's a real hodgepodge of people who turn up.
In 1908, the Honorable Montague Parker was 29 years old. The young Englishman had studied at Eton College, the most prestigious private school in the country, where those with money and power sent their sons to learn how to wield money and power. After completing his schooling, Parker had joined the army. He became a lieutenant in the Grenadier Guards and saw action in the vicious Second Boer War. But by 1908, his military career was stagnating. Still a young man, he was looking for a new start in life, a new adventure.
Montague Parker is in many ways a typical young Victorian Edwardian aristocrat. And like many people in his position, he's looking for a role. He's somebody who doesn't need to work, so he needs a reason to be. And along comes the Ark of the Covenant, via, of all things, a Finnish librarian.
43-year-old Walter Henrik Juvelius had a theory that the Ark of the Covenant had never been in the Temple of Solomon at all. Instead, it had been kept in a secret chamber carved out of the rock beneath the temple. So when the Babylonians sacked Jerusalem and tore down the temple, the Ark remained safely hidden below.
So we have this bookish Finnish academic, Walter Henrik Juvelius, who has a pretty far-out theory that the Book of Ezekiel contains clues to the whereabouts of the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the Book of Ezekiel, it is the weirdest book in the Old Testament, but Juvelius thinks that it's effectively a roadmap to finding the Ark of the Covenant.
But Juvelius was just a schoolmaster. He didn't have the money or connections to launch an expedition to the Holy Land. So he went looking for somebody who did. In autumn 1908, he found Montague Parker, and their quest was underway.
Now that Parker has his mission, he does what every chap would do in his position. He trawls the gentlemen's clubs of Pall Mall at the center of the British Empire, trying to get everybody riled up, interested, and more importantly, parting with their cash or any resources that they can offer.
Recruiting more wealthy men to the cause, Parker raised around £7,000 for his expedition. That's the equivalent of more than £500,000 today. Then in July 1909, they all set off for the Holy Land.
So he manages to pick up a yacht, somehow gets his hands on a ragbag of people, a Swiss clairvoyant, a tugboat captain from the Congo, a cricket player who's interested in coming along for the journey. And armed with this rather unusual bunch of people and the resources he needs, he starts to make his way to Jerusalem.
At the beginning of the 20th century, Jerusalem was under the control of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans had ruled the city for almost 500 years, but by the early 1900s, the empire was in a parlous state.
300 years before, the Ottoman Empire, centered on today's modern Turkey, had absolutely terrified Europe. It had reached the gates of Vienna. It was a seemingly unstoppable Muslim empire, and it ruled over the holy places of Islam. But by the time we get to the end of the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire is a shadow of its former self. It is sometimes described as the sick man of Europe. It's decaying, it's falling apart, it's corrupt, it's in its death agonies. Now, Montague Parker is undoubtedly aware of this, as are his colleagues, and they see an opportunity to use the weakness of Ottoman control over Jerusalem, which is part of the Ottoman Empire, to further their expedition. You know, they just think there'll be an Ottoman official that we can bribe. Everybody needs money, so it's not going to be difficult to get underneath the Temple Mount.
Relying on Eusebius's work and on half-remembered scripture from their school days, Parker's team began digging into an ancient system of water tunnels and shafts that ran beneath Temple Mount. Eusebius's calculations suggested the Ark of the Covenant was hidden in a chamber accessible through those tunnels. They diverted water from a spring and drained the passageways, searching for a formerly submerged entrance to the secret chamber.
So through 1909 and 1910, they're frantically digging underground, but all they've got to show for this painstaking and pretty mucky activity is some oil lamps, pottery shards, a few coins, and an ancient toilet. A modern archaeologist would think this was gold, but not to Parker and his team. They wanted the Ark. This was no good. They simply weren't getting their mission accomplished.
Still determined to find the Ark, in 1911, Parker resolved to search the one place that had not been properly explored, the holiest place of all, underneath the dome of the rock itself.
By 1911, Parker is getting a bit desperate, so he decides to head straight for the Temple Mount. He's going for the center of the action. How to do that? Well, he bribes a local official, the guardian, in fact, of the Temple Mount. Parker and his gang get beneath the Temple Mount and they start digging. And this really is the last chance for the intrepid aristocrat.
His team disguised themselves as locals and dug only after dark. For 9 nights, they excavated in the tunnels below the Temple Mount. But then they were betrayed.
Basically, too many people wanted in on the bribes, and the more digging that Parker and his group did, the more bribes they were being asked to pay. At some point, Parker just drew a line. No more bribes, no more money, go away. Well, unfortunately, the result of that was word got out about the digging to the local people. And soon, what Parker and his team were faced with was an angry, murderous mob.
Crowds of protesters took to the streets, threatening to lynch anyone involved in the excavations. Parker and his team made a speedy exit, fleeing back to England on their yacht.
Parker's forced to flee with his gang, and even though he's acquired a certain amount of celebrity status, that's no compensation for not finding the Ark. He does plan to return to Jerusalem, but then the First World War breaks out, and that changes everything.
The strange theory of Walter Henrik Eusebius remains unproven. Whatever mysteries the Temple Mount may contain still lie hidden. The site is too sacred to be explored. But as one truth seeker has found out, perhaps all those who have gone looking for the Ark of the Covenant have been searching in the wrong place and asking the wrong question. To find where the Ark was hidden, we first need to find out why the Ark story first took hold and why was it abandoned so soon after. The truth seekers are hunting for one of history's greatest enigmas, the Ark of the Covenant. According to the Bible, it was the holiest relic of the ancient Israelites, a relic of immense power and importance.
The Ark of the Covenant is an iconic artifact. Explorers and archaeologists have spent centuries searching for it at sites all around the world, but they've never found it.
The team has examined the biblical account for clues. and they have seen how previous expeditions have come up empty-handed. But anthropologist Dr. Karen Bellinger has a different approach.
For me, the key question isn't where is the ark, it's why. Why did the Israelites tell this story? And to understand that, we need to actually look more closely at the Israelites themselves, at their culture and what we know about it.
In 1896, pioneering British archaeologist Flinders Petrie was conducting excavations at the ancient Egyptian city of Thebes. There, he discovered a black granite monument. It was more than 3 meters high and had an extraordinary and unexpected inscription on it.
It's in the funerary stele of a pharaoh called Merneptah, who died in 1203 BC. And this stela actually refers mainly to his defeat of various other foes. But there's one smoking gun line. It refers to Israel.
According to the book of Exodus in the Bible, the Israelites came from Egypt. They were enslaved there by a pharaoh until the prophet Moses led them to freedom.
The search for the Ark of the Covenant is really based on this story. But the granite monument found by Flinders Petrie doesn't say the Israelites were in Egypt. It says they were a nomadic or rural people living in Canaan.
Canaan was the Bible's promised land, where Moses was supposed to have led his people after they left Egypt. But despite countless digs and expeditions in Egypt over the 2 centuries, no archaeological evidence has been found for the events described in the book of Exodus. And nothing has been found of Moses himself.
It's possible that Moses was a figure in some historical context for Israel, but there is no evidence for that outside of the words of the Bible.
There were certainly connections between the Israelites and Egypt, however. In ancient times, Canaan was a land where different cultures, religions, and powers combined and competed. It was wedged between great empires, the Egyptians to the south, the Hittites to the north, and the Assyrians to the east. Through trade, migration, and warfare, as one empire rose and another faded, there was the inevitable movement of people, ideas, and beliefs. Among them was the use of sacred chests.
Archaeologically speaking, we do see a number of ceremonial vessels across Near Eastern cultures, and in Egypt particularly. And they bear a very strong resemblance to the Ark as described in the Bible. Famous example in ancient Egypt occurred in the tomb of Tutankhamun.
In 1922, archaeologists were digging in the Valley of the Kings, the ancient burial site in central Egypt. There, they made a remarkable discovery: the lost tomb of the Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun. It dated back to the 14th century BC. But in contrast to most other Egyptian tombs of that era, grave robbers had not stripped Tutankhamun's resting place of its riches. The archaeologists unearthed a treasure trove unlike any seen in the modern era. And among the artifacts was what looked like an ark.
The ark found in Tutankhamun's tomb was actually very similar to the one described in the Bible, although a slightly different shape. But it was similar enough that Howard Carter, directing the excavation, saw it and reportedly thought for a moment that he had found the Ark of the Covenant.
They had similar dimensions. Both chests were made of wood, both were lined in gold, and both had poles so they could be carried.
This was not the Ark of the Covenant, but its discovery was still really exciting for people because it showed that an object like that described in the Bible could have been made at the right time period, and it could have survived all these years. So maybe the Ark of the Covenant, likewise, was still out there somewhere.
The ark found in the tomb of Tutankhamun was topped with a statue of the god Anubis. Throughout the ancient Near East at this time, similar chests were used to house holy objects, sacred stones and statues.
It's possible that if it did exist, the Israelite Ark carried statues or other sacred items associated with their religion. In terms of understanding the religious practices of the Israelites, we know that they're the ancestors of the Jews, but they did not practice Judaism as we would think of it today.
Early Israelites worshipped a number of different gods. Chief among them was El and his consort, the mother goddess Asherah.
One of the real problems with this story of Moses as told in the Bible is that it suggests that the Israelites were already united in their belief in one God before they even reached Canaan. And that's simply not borne out in the archaeological record.
The Israelites worshipped deities of Canaan and shared them with the other tribes of the area. Later, the different tribes of Canaan began to form nation-states. Each kingdom took on its own national god. For the Israelites, that was a son of El named Yahweh. Over the 5 centuries that followed, the Israelite worship of their God split from its Canaanite roots. The old gods and the old ways were rejected. The Israelites began to worship one God alone. It is possible there was a holy chest involved in the tribe's beliefs, a remnant of earlier practices, but through the story of Moses was made part of the Israelites' new religion.
The biblical story of the Ark of the Covenant gives the Israelites an origin story, complete with a physical manifestation, to match their new belief system.
Whether this physical ark survived their journeys from desert nomads to settled city dwellers is debatable, but the idea of an ark, that manifestation of the Israelites as a chosen people, had to survive.
It's this unifying, incredibly sacred symbol of power that God gave to the Israelite nation.
The Ark of the Covenant may still rest in a dark and secret chamber buried beneath the earth, or it may have been destroyed or stolen.
Nothing's been found that could be identified conclusively as the biblical Ark of the Covenant.
It may have existed only as a symbol, a sign and rallying call of a people that emerged from the desert and created one of the most powerful spiritual movements the world has ever known.
We may never find the Ark itself, and I'm not convinced that's what really matters. After all, to the Israelites, the actual box wasn't as important as what it stood for. That was the real Ark.
Maybe it's not about the stories and legends. Maybe the real quest for the Ark is our search for that direct contact with God.
One thing is certain, as long as there is hope it is out there will always be those seeking the truth.